Hi guys, welcome to math class. Today we're going to be doing pages 22 to 24. Unfortunately, I am not going to do the discussion part because we're not here to talk to each other, but the rest of it we're going to do. So we're going to do pages 22 to 24. Hope all is well. You're enjoying your time at home. I started watching this Netflix. I guess it's a series. It's called All American. It's pretty good. It's about football, and I'm not into football, but it's actually pretty interesting. So I've been watching that every day. All right, so here we go. Page 22. So this is a do now, which is just review of stuff we've been doing called completing the square. And completing the square has to do with perfect square trinomials. It's a method of solving a quadratic equation when factoring is just not an option. So, my number one go-to is factoring, but if I can't factor it, I have to have another way. So just like I've said, in class before, like my number one way of coming home is the Meadowbrook Parkway. But if it's closed, I'm not sleeping at school, so I figure out another way. So if I find a quadratic and I want to solve it, and it can't be factored, completing the square is one method. All right. So I want to make this a perfect square trinomial. So I take half of 2, which equals 1, and then I square that 1, which gives me 1. So I add 1 to both sides. So that gives me x plus 1 squared equals 9. Now, since that's a 9, this could have been factored, but you have to follow directions, and it says completing the square. All right, so I take the square root of both sides. That gives me x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus 3. 3 because 3 times 3 is 9, so the square root of 9 is 3. Okay, so now I'm going to subtract 1. It looks a little messy, but I get x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus 3. Okay, so that gives me my two answers. Negative 1 plus 3, which is 2, and negative 1 minus 3, which is negative 4, which tells me when you get integer answers, you definitely could have factored that. All right, so I was going to go through this whole thing on how I could solve this using just letters, and it's actually pretty cool, and you end up with what's called the quadratic formula. But it takes a few minutes, and I don't want to really lose you guys, so I'll save that for the next time I see you. All right, so this is the quadratic formula. It's x is equal to negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And it actually comes from taking this and solving for x. Okay, so x is equal to negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, we would have had so much fun singing that together, but it's just not happening right now. Okay? All right. Now, you don't have to memorize this, but you might want to write it on a piece of paper. It is on the reference sheet. You just kind of have to know how to use it. So one more time, just because I miss singing to you. X is equal to negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that's the quadratic formula. Now, when you use the quadratic formula, you have to make sure that your quadratic is in standard form. So we're going to take x squared minus 2x equals 12, and we're going to move the 12 to the other side. So we get x squared minus 2x minus 12 equals 0. A is the number in front of the x squared, so a is 1. B is the number in front of the x, or the linear term, so b is negative 2. And c is the constant, the number all by itself, which is negative 12. So then you just take all those integers, and they don't have to be integers, they just have to be a number, and you're going to plug them into our formula. So x is equal to negative b, so the negative of negative 2, plus or minus square root b squared, negative 2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is neg 12. all over 2 times a. All right. Now, all of those numbers underneath the radical sign, the answer to that is called the discriminant. So I always calculate my discriminant first. All right. So I get x is equal to the negative of a negative is a positive, plus or minus square root. And I'm going to calculate that. So 2 squared is 4. Keep that on the side. Negative 4 times negative 12 is 48. So that gives me 52. And that's all over 2. Now, that actually is the answer. It can be simplified, but we're going to save that for another day. So the answer is x is equal to 2 plus or minus square root of 52 all over 2. And again, that can be simplified, but we're going to save that for another day. The square root of 52 is irrational, so I'm going to leave it like that. All right? So if you want to put this into steps, I guess you could say step number 1, put your quadratic in standard form. So that gives me 1/2 of r squared minus 6r minus 2 equals 0. Find your a, find your b, find your c. Okay? So standard form, find your a, find your b, find your c. And then go to your formula. X is equal to negative b, so the negative of negative 6, plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac, running out of room. Oh no, that got weird. All right, just because I ran out of room, it got really weird, but hopefully you can see that. All right, let me erase it and try to, here's an eraser. You never have enough room sometimes. Sorry, guys. All right, so I'm going to try to write it better. Back on writing. X is equal to the negative of negative 6 plus or minus square root b squared minus 4 times 1/2 times negative 2. I didn't do much better, but all over 2a. Okay. So x is equal to the negative of a negative is a positive, plus or minus square root. So negative 6 squared is 36. I'm getting my calculator. I'm still with you. 36. Keep that on the side. I got negative 4 times 1/2, so that's negative 2. And negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. 36 plus 4 is 40. And it's all over 1. When something's over 1, you can kind of just leave it. So the answer is x is equal to 6 plus or minus the square root of 40. And again, the square root of 40 can be simplified, but we're going to leave it like that for now because I don't want to overwhelm you. Page 25 is review of simplifying radicals, which we will do. Okay, so for now, we're just going to leave everything the way it is and don't worry about simplest form. All right, so step number 1, put it in standard form. Step number 2, find your A, find your B, find your C. Step number 3, substitute. X is equal to negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay. Hey, maybe you can get your chorus credit today while you're doing this work, right? So x is equal to negative 8 plus or minus square root. All right, so the number under the radical is called the discriminant. You're going to want to remember that. It does have uses. Maybe you can think about like what types of numbers do you get when you have certain square roots. All right, I got 120 here. All right, so think about it. Like that's 120, but what if it was 121? Maybe something different would happen, right? All right, so again, I'm going to leave it unsimplified, but I'm sure you all see that, you could divide the 8 by 4 and make this simpler. But we're going to talk about that another day, okay? So we have x is equal to negative 8 plus or minus radical or square root of 120 over 4. All right, so let me do one more with you. All right, so put it in standard form. And we do call it x is equal to, but like in this case, we're actually solving for y. But you can still call it x is equal to. I think in this one, I should have really called it a p. P equals. All right. 2y squared plus 3y, and then it's minus 9, because when I move that 4, I get a negative 9. Okay? So a is 2, b is 3, and c is negative 9. All right, so y is equal to, even though it doesn't match my song, but it's okay. And this one up here, I guess that should have been an R, right? An R. 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 Don't worry about stuff like that. We'll get it all together eventually. Okay, x is equal to negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Oh, okay, negative 3 plus or minus square root. All right, 3 squared is 9. 4 times 9 is 36. 36 times 2 is 72. 9 plus 72, 81. Ooh, 81. Yay, 81. Okay, so y is equal to negative 3 plus or minus 9 over 4. Square root of 81 is 9. Rational number. So y is equal to negative 3 minus 9. Well, I'll do negative 3 plus 9 first. Negative 3 plus 9 is 6. So the first answer is 6 over 4. And then my other answer, negative 3 minus 9, negative 12, divided by 4 is negative 3. 2 answers. Look at that. Lovely. Now the 6/4, you can simplify that into 3 halves, 1.5, whatever makes you happy. Doing math makes me happy. All right, so for exercise 5, it says just solve these any way you want, okay? So factors of 5 that give me a 3, that's not going to happen, so I can't do that. I'm going to do this one using quadratic formula. 2 times, okay, this one I'm going to factor. Okay, so let me factor this one. All right, so I have 2x squared plus 6x minus 3 equals 0. Of course, I'm having spaciousness again. Okay, where did the plus 6 and the minus 1 come from? It came from splitting the 5. I split the 5 because 2 times 3 is 6. All right, I can pull out a 2x. That gives me x plus 3. I pull out a neg 1. That gives me neg 1 times x plus 3. So I get 2x minus 1 and x plus 3. So if I set those guys, what do I call them guys? I don't know. Equal to 0, I get 2x equals 1 and then x equals 1/2. Okay, remember it says solve these using a different method for each. So like you don't have to do what I'm doing. Just because this is what I wanted to do doesn't mean you have to. So I'm doing x is equal to negative 3. Okay, so now this one, I'm going to multiply everything by 2. So that gives me x squared minus 2x minus 8 equals 0. Now, the reason I did that was because I want to complete the square, and I didn't want to deal with the half. So, you know, as long as you're using a property of equality, you can basically do whatever you want. So the properties of equality, those are like whatever you add to one side, you add to the other. Basically, whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. So adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and square rooting all fall under that. All right, so completing this square. X squared minus 2x plus, I don't know, equals 8. I'm going to add 1. I'm going to add 1. Okay, so that gives me x subtract 1 squared equals 9. Got to move this up a little bit. All right, take the square root of both sides. I get x minus 1 equals plus or minus 3. So I get x equals 1 plus or minus 3. So that gives me 1 plus 3 is 4, and 1 minus 3 is -2. So those two answers there. And now for the quadratic formula. So find the A, find the B, find the C. Be careful with that C, it's a negative, okay? So now I'm going to use my quadratic formula. X is equal to negative, forgot what B was, B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. X is equal to -3 plus or minus the discriminant. Let's see what the discriminant is. 4 times 5. 4 times 5 is 20. Plus a 9 is 29. All over 2. Ta-da! Quadratic formula. Advice. I always got a little bit of that for you, right? Advice. If you can't factor it, you either want to do completing the square or quadratic formula. Quadratic formula is super great because it works for everything. Not everything can be factored. And sometimes completing the square is a little rough when you have coefficients of the quadratic term that are, large. Basically, this is all for today. The quadratic formula is derived by completing the square on the general form of the quadratic equation. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a doesn't equal 0, right? A can't equal 0 because if a equals 0, it wouldn't be a quadratic. And then we wouldn't even be having these conversations. The formula can be used to solve any quadratic equation and is especially useful for those that are not easily solved when using another method, i.e. factoring or completing the square. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Hope to talk to you soon. Take care. Hope all is well. Bye.